We have breaking news. CBS News has obtained a new list of hostages being released by Hamas in Gaza.
That's right. And that list includes 10 names, and an American is expected to be a part of this release.
CBS News. Oh, please, Errol.
CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab joining us now over the phone from Jerusalem to speak about this latest development. Imtiaz, there are 5 women, there are 5 children on this list. Speak to us about the significance now that it appears the ceasefire is holding and the hostage exchanges are continuing.
You're absolutely right, Errol. For the 6th night in a row, we are seeing these extraordinary scenes of people who've been held hostage inside the Gaza Strip for well over 50 days now. I can confirm that 2 of those hostages have been freed. They're being described as 2 Russian-Israeli women who exited Gaza just in the last hour or so. And as you say, we're rather expecting to see a further 10 hostages freed from Gaza, a mixture of women and children. As part of this deal, as we know, Palestinian prisoners are being released as well. Again, we are likely to see 30 Palestinian prisoners released into the West Bank. Again, a mixture of women and children, some as young as 14 years old. And all this really just underscores what we've been seeing now for the last 6 days, which is this extraordinary scene of Israelis being reunited with their loved ones across Israel. But of course, we've also been seeing similar scenes in the occupied West Bank and in East Jerusalem of Palestinian families being reunited. Of course, Palestinians view prisoners being held inside of their prisons as prisoners of war. And so a lot of emotion on the street. But again, there's also a lot of tension as well, given the fact that this is the last day of this truce between Israel and Hamas, as we understand that there's a lot of negotiation going on to ensure that this will be prolonged for another day.
And as our viewers see, that is a live image of the West Bank where Israel is releasing some of these Palestinian prisoners and a 3-to-1 ratio for the hostages. Imtiaz, I want to follow up with you on the point that you were making about some of them are as young as 14. Can you tell us anything more about the Palestinian prisoners that are being released?
Yeah, I mean, again, as we've been seeing ever since we saw the initial releases begin on Thursday night, and we were on the ground in a village called Beitunia, which is on the suburbs of Ramallah. And it was an extraordinary scene. You had thousands and thousands of people fill the streets of Beitunia greeting these young people released from prison, really giving them a hero's welcome. And it just underscores the fact that in Palestinian society, the issue of prisoners isn't just a deeply felt one. It is something that is felt by nearly every family. And if you look at some of the statistics, according to the UN itself, 1 in 5 Palestinians will have been through Israel's military prison system. 1 in 5. At the moment, there's at least 260 children being detained by Israel as well. And really, when you kind of break it down on the actual numbers, on any given year, between 500 to 1,000 children are put through this system. And as we've seen over the past several days, around 150 Palestinian prisoners have been released. Well, we also know that in that time, Israel has detained around 150 Palestinians across the West Bank as well. So while we're seeing these prisoner releases, we're also seeing this mass incarceration of Palestinians happening in real time just over the last 6 days alone.
And Imtiaz, you wonder then, with the positive development that more hostages are being released, more Palestinian prisoners are being released, there is a temporary ceasefire in place now. This may get renewed again as we move into tomorrow if it can continue. Does this help us get closer to a potential diplomatic solution? You know, the U.S. president has said that there needs to be 2 states. There needs to be 2 nations for each side. But that has been elusive for every U.S. administration and every government entity there in the region. Might this, though, allow some space for discussions on that front to emerge?
Yeah, elusive for the last 56 years. We've had this occupation of Palestinian territories for 56 years now, Errol. it's an extraordinarily long period of time. And as you so clearly articulated, the fact that we've seen president after president come in and try to come up with some sort of agreement which would lead to a permanent solution, which would result in a two-state solution, we just have not seen it. But you only have to listen to the words of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who just 2 days ago, while addressing his own Likud party, said that he was the only prime minister who could, and I'm quoting here, prevent a two-state solution. This is Israel's current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, just 2 days ago. Although it's been very clear that President Biden wants to see a two-state solution, it's very clear that Mr. Netanyahu does not. In saying that, it does look as if there's a lot of pressure on Netanyahu to ensure that these hostage releases continue. It is something that has animated Israeli society in ways that I, frankly, haven't seen in really the decade or so that I've been covering this story. And when you consider who Prime Minister Netanyahu is just as a politician, his political survival is really kind of the most paramount thing to him. And he can tell that when it comes to the issue of hostages, and we understand there's around well over 150 hostages still inside Gaza being held by Gaza, that this is something that the Israeli people want to see. But there's a challenge there because the longer this pause in fighting continues, the more pressure he will be under by the U.S. and indeed other Western powers to ensure that the fighting in Gaza doesn't start again. Remember, nearly 15,000 people have been killed since fighting began inside of Gaza. Several hundred buildings have been destroyed just in Gaza City alone. There's a humanitarian crisis there unfolding in a way that we just have not seen before. And so many people want to see this pause in fighting become permanent. But again, that will be a decision for the Israeli Prime Minister.
We've been listening to our foreign correspondent, Imtiaz Tyab. We're watching the scenes both in the West Bank and at the Rafah border crossing in Egypt with Gaza on the news that more hostages are being released, and we understand that includes the potential for yet another American. We'll continue to follow this breaking news event and bring you updates throughout the day. Imtiaz, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ed.
CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan joins us now on the phone from Washington. Margaret, you actually obtained this list of names from your sources. The U.S., we heard from Robert Berger, was hoping that there would be 2 Americans released. Still, there is 1 American expected to be on this list. Talk to us about the significance of and what goes into determining who is released when.
Well, this release today of 10 people, and 10 is the number to focus on, because for every 10 hostages, Israel agrees to pause its military operations for 1 day. That was the deal they struck with Hamas as part of this U.S. and Qatari brokered hostage deal. So for every 10 hostages, 1 more day of pause, as well as that trade for Palestinian detainees or prisoners to be released from Israeli centers. Now, on this list, it's made up of a number of dual nationals, some full Israelis, some who have citizenship in Germany, Russia, Netherlands, and the United States. So a number of these governments have been putting pressure on some of the negotiators to try to get their nationals included here in this latest release. Now, we know that to date, the White House had indicated they expected 3 Americans to be released in this phase 1 hostage deal. We saw 1 come out, that 4-year-old girl, Abigail Edan. Now, today, we may see a 2nd American. And as you just mentioned, there is a 3rd. We have yet to see a name appear on a list or a release. And this is just what is expected in this release. Everything around this diplomacy is sensitive, and until they are safely in the custody of the Red Cross and then on Israeli soil, everyone sort of holds their breath.
And Margaret, while you're speaking with us, we're watching this footage from the Rafah border crossing in Egypt, right next to where the Gaza Strip is, as we believe this batch of hostages will then be handed over from the Red Cross and treat them medically as they are needed. But if we zoom out to the big picture, this suggests then that the diplomacy is working. The first ceasefire held. It was extended. This is the proof of concept you had spoken about, I think, last week. as everyone is trying to say, hey, make this permanent. Let's keep going until all of the hostages are released. What then does this say about the bigger picture and the bigger effort to end hostilities?
Well, that is a harder problem to solve for. What we have seen in terms of the negotiations with the hostages is it has really become such a lightning rod political issue within Israel, politically loaded for Israeli leaders who are seeing these marches and pressure from family members to bring their loved ones home, while also alongside that prosecuting a war that they say is being jeopardized by allowing Hamas to have space and time to potentially, reconfigure its own military operations against Israel. So there is a trade-off here. There's a tension between the two goals. From the diplomats, the focus is on trying to negotiate this release because those military operations to free hostages failed. Remember, is the IDF and the Israeli Prime Minister claims that one of the justifications for that siege on Al-Shifa Hospital was the belief that there are hostages inside. When they got there, there weren't any. There were two bodies of people believed to be hostages found nearby that 14-acre complex, but none inside. So that put that focus back on negotiating a way out. And so far in phase one, it's just the children, it's just the women. There are men being held. And that gets much more difficult. There are elderly people who are being held. And as I know it from my sources and my reporting, the next phase, if they move into phase two of extending this pause in fighting, would allow for hostages who fall into that elder person category. That would give some men the potential to leave if they are above military age, meaning they couldn't serve in the Israeli armed forces. Perhaps they would be released in that next phase. We're focused on that because we also know there are some American men being held. After that, it would move to soldiers, males. And remember, in Israel, there is compulsory military service for so many. If you are a reservist, if you are an active duty soldier, that classification puts you in this much more difficult category to negotiate. And that's where we are seeing some of the diplomats, including, by the way, the CIA director, who is, as our Olivia Ghazi has reported, meeting with the Mossad director in Qatar recently. They are focused. The Secretary of State is supposed to be arriving in Israel tomorrow. He has said he will also be talking about these hostages. Their top presidential hostage envoy is traveling to Israel today. So there is a real push to try to prioritize the well-being of some of these civilians who were pulled into captivity by Hamas and other militant groups. It's not clear if all of them will make it home. But we know that is where the focus is in these short-term pauses. A larger diplomatic deal is much more difficult to try to negotiate at this point. There's also pressure being put by the United States on the Israeli government to articulate exactly how they see this coming to an end. What we know from Israel is their top goal is to get Yahya Sinwar, that commander of Hamas.
And we should note for our viewers that you are now looking at an image of the West Bank as there are hostages being released across the Rafah border crossing with Egypt. Israel then is releasing at a 3-to-1 ratio prisoners, Palestinian prisoners that have been detained in Israel there in the West Bank.
Margaret Brennan, our chief foreign affairs correspondent and moderator of Face the Nation, speaking with us on the phone on this breaking news and the first to share the list of the identities of these hostages with us. Margaret, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
CBS News contributor Robert Berger joins us now from Jerusalem. Robert, remind us about the 3 U.S. citizens that previously had been held by Hamas, that have been previously released, and the importance of the potential of another American being released today.
Well, it was expected from the beginning of this truce last Friday that 3 Americans would be released in the coming days, and only 4-year-old Abigail was released a couple of days ago. And so that left 2 women that we expected to be released, and now 1, as far as we know, it's probably happening right now, is being released. So that would leave 1 other woman that we expected to be released who hasn't been. And there are overall maybe 9 or so American hostages still held in Gaza.
Robert, we also understand that as a part of this agreement, you have these 10 hostages being released by Hamas and 30 Palestinian prisoners being released by Israel, that 3-to-1 ratio we keep watching with each batch. And this is happening in the backdrop of international partners hoping that this continues to be renewed, the ceasefire in order for the release of those being detained. Tell us about that side of this equation, the Palestinian prisoners as well.
Okay, so right now, 12 Israeli hostages are being released. That would be 10 that were part of the deal, and another 2 Russian Israeli citizens that Hamas decided to release basically on its own in a gesture to Russian President Vladimir Putin, who has been supportive of Hamas. And then Israel will now release 30 more Palestinian prisoners, 15 women and 15 teenagers. They were convicted of involvement in various incidents, from attempted stabbings to throwing stones and firebombs.
Robert, there is a lot of international pressure riding on these exchanges going well. Talk to us about how folks in Israel are perceiving these hostage releases.
Well, you know, it's mixed feelings. Of course, there's great elation. It's very moving to watch these families, these kids who have been reunited with their families over the past several days. And so everyone's happy to see the hostages coming out. At the same time, when I say mixed feelings, it's because there are still a lot of hostages left in Gaza. Even after today's release, we're talking about maybe 140 or so hostages still left in Gaza. And of course, everyone wants to see them come back and realize that that's probably not going to happen immediately. So it's definitely mixed feelings.
And speak to us about the pressure on the Israeli government to allow more hostages, or at least negotiate for more hostages to be released, considering there are so many more left, and not continuing the assault on Hamas. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been very adamant that that is the ultimate goal and that will continue. Israelis have said, please prioritize the hostages more. How does this play into that?
Well, you know, there is a lot of support for Israel going back to war against Hamas because of the terrible massacre that took place on October 7th, 1,200 people killed in the most brutal ways. At the same time, there is pressure on the government to extend the ceasefire, which, by the way, may happen. There's speculation that the negotiations going on right now in Qatar, which involve the head of the Mossad, Israel's spy agency, and the head of the CIA, and their counterparts from Qatar and Egypt, that they will perhaps be able to extend this ceasefire for another couple of days under the same formula, 10 Israeli hostages each day in exchange for 30 Palestinian prisoners each day. But at some point, the negotiations are going to get a lot more difficult, and Israel may have to go back to fighting, and there is public support for that.
And we're looking at footage from the Rafah border crossing where we understand these hostages will be transferred while in possession of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Robert Berger, we appreciate your update on this breaking event. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.